So welcome to the Elevation Training Technologies podcast. And on today's episode, I want to talk about the concept of clean bulking in quotation marks. And I've discussed this in similar parts before in the concept of that a lot of people are kind of a little bit misled into believing that they can eat as much healthy food, air quote, as they want and they can still lose weight. The same kind of principle is actually true with actually gaining weight. So a lot of people, and this is kind of more perpetuated more in the bodybuilding, body composition industry, where they believe that if you just eat healthy food, that you can just build muscle mass, even if you're in a calorie surplus, and not gain any body fat. And I'm going to say this from the start that this is not true. That the premise of gaining weight, for people who do not know, it is actually the polar opposite to losing weight. So as opposed to eating less than you burn, when you're trying to build muscle, you have to eat a little bit more than you burn. So the reason being is that muscle is metabolically active tissue, so it actually requires energy to survive. So this is why someone who is more muscle bound can actually eat more food and maintain their weight, or can remain very, very lean while eating quite a large abundance of food, because their muscle requires a lot of energy to survive. So this is why it's so important that when you try and lose weight, even for women, that they get involved in some form of strength training, because the reason being is that the more muscle you have on your frame, the more calories you will burn, and it will keep your metabolism healthier. It means you can eat more food while losing weight. Now, in terms of clean bulking, the premise that you can eat as much food as you desire, as long as it's healthy and not gain any weight, and all this food's going to go only to muscle, is very misleading. Now, for a natural athlete, for someone who can only gain so much muscle in a given time period, usually on a monthly basis, outside of if you're a newbie, you might be able to gain a bit more, but for people who've been training, I would probably say maybe 2 years more, the kind of realistic expectation here would be maybe gaining a pound or two maybe of muscle in a month. Now, usually when you gain weight, like I said, you have to be in a calorie surplus as opposed to being in a calorie deficit when you're in a fat loss program. So, this kind of myth and this mythology around certain foods providing magical health benefits, and that it bypasses thermodynamics in terms of that even if I'm in a calorie surplus, as long as it's healthy food, air quote, micronutrient dense, whole, unrefined food, as long as it's that, it will all go to muscle and none of it will go to fat, is very untrue. So even if you are a natural athlete, the potential for you to gain muscle is a little bit harder than someone who is enhanced using metabolic steroidal compounds and stuff like that. So if you're a natural, you have to be a bit more patient with this. And usually I would recommend doing some form of a slower bulk. So if you're trying to gain muscle mass, I would recommend going a little bit slower with it, because like I said, like with a natural athlete, there's only so much muscle you can put on in a given month. Now, I'm not trying to put limitations on people, but people get a little bit unrealistic sometimes when they're trying to gain muscle, and what ends up happening is they end up eating an astronomical amount of food and they overshoot their calorie surplus by way too much, and then they end up putting on a tremendous amount of body fat. Now, using kind of the example of, say, someone is looking to build, say, a reasonable amount of time, just say 6 months, trying to gain as much muscle mass as they possibly can as a natural athlete, and they find that they've followed the kind of propaganda of the health and fitness industry, and they end up reading some muscle magazines, and they say eat as much as you possibly can and weight train. So they do have a good exercise program, but they're eating way too much. They're eating a surplus of say benefit the doubt 1,000 calories, which is very, very high. Usually when I recommend people gaining weight, I recommend people having a smaller surplus between maybe 150 to maybe 250. Just a small calorie surplus. So, say this example, this person is eating this astronomical surplus and they're gaining between 3 to 5 pounds in a given week, which is a lot of weight. Now, they may be only gaining maybe a quarter pound of muscle each week, but the remaining of it is purely fat and water. So they get to the end of their 6 months and they realize at the end of their 6 months they've only gained between 6 to 12 pounds maybe of muscle, which is a brilliant, I would just say 6 pounds. It's probably a bit more realistic. 6 pounds maybe of muscle. If that, it may be between 3 and 6 or 6 and 12. It really depends on how long you've been training for. I would actually recommend, just so people can get the correct information on this, looking at Lyle McDonald's website and looking at specifically how much muscle you can actually realistically gain. There's a great article, I just can't remember the details off the top of my head. But just say, for the benefit of the doubt, that they've only, in 6 months, they've only gained, realistically, benefit of the doubt, we'll say 3 pounds of muscle. But they have also gained 27 pounds of fat. Now, for someone who has spent that much time trying to gain muscle, now they have to go through an arduous process of trying to strip away their body fat over an even longer period probably than the mass building phase to try and get that body fat off, only to reveal 3 pounds of muscle. Now, what I would recommend is going slower. And this way you can maintain a relatively lean body fat while putting on muscle as best you can, doing some kind of higher frequency programming for a natural athlete, focus on progressive overload, getting stronger from week to week, having a strategic deload so you can feel recovered, and you can give your body some active recovery so you can hit it harder later on. I recommend, like I said, trying to gain about a quarter pound a week. That's really, really good if you're a natural athlete. Now, if you're a total beginner, you might be able to get away with putting on maybe a pound a week and be totally fine and still maintain quite a lean body fat because you're new to the stimulus of weight training. So you usually find when you first start, you actually put on more muscle mass. Now, if you're going slower, say the second analogy, you have someone who is gaining about a quarter pound a week, doing the weight training, they're getting stronger from week to week, and they're in a surplus of 150 calories and to 250 calories. So just to kind of clarify that, a surplus, when I'm saying surplus, I'm talking about whatever your maintenance calories is, what you don't gain or lose weight on, that's your maintenance. A surplus is going slightly above your maintenance calories. So this provides energy for new tissue and the muscle you're going to be building. So say that someone, does that and they maintain their weight is going up very gradually and they're maintaining a relatively lean body fat. And at the end of 6 months, they actually gain 6 pounds. But they gain 6 pounds of muscle, but they gain, say, 10 pounds overall. So they may have put on maybe 4 pounds of body fat, maybe, if that. Now, for someone, like, the difference there, as opposed to going all guns blazing like a bull in a china shop, for someone who's only gained 3 pounds of muscle and 27 pounds of body fat, they're going to have a long dieting phase to try and get that body fat off so they can see their muscle, and it's only a small amount of muscle. Whereas the second analogy, this person's only gained 10 pounds overall, but 6 pounds of muscle, meaning that they've only got 4 pounds of body fat. They could easily get that off in 4 weeks, a pound loss each week. So it's actually better going slower and having only a small surplus, and also taking your time, and also, like, just to clarify, the transition period when you finish, you won't have as much of a fat loss phase to go through. It's very unrealistic to think you can build so much muscle. You will not. If you're putting on 6 pounds in a week, I guarantee you that is not all muscle at all. And a large portion with that will be fat and water. So back to the point of the podcast. Obviously, if this is going on YouTube, it will be in video form. So that's why I got confused. But just to go on about the clean bulking again. Now, I will say this right up, being a qualified nutritionist, being a qualified personal trainer, and doing and looking at the research on this, that you can actually eat a small percentage of your calories from foods which are more refined. But the majority of the diet has to be in place. You have to have a balance of macronutrients, and you have to have an array of micronutrients, so vitamins, minerals, and you also have to have fiber, water, all this good stuff. But the thing is, even if you eat healthy food and you're in only a small surplus, you still will be gaining a little bit of body fat. It's kind of a catch-22 situation when you're gaining muscle, is that you do need a little bit more extra calories to build that muscle mass, but you have to be in a calorie surplus, which means you will be gaining a little bit of body fat. Now, what I recommend is going slow with it. If you're a beginner, you might be able to do it a bit more aggressively. For people who, like I've said, have been training maybe 2 years, I would recommend that if you're a bit more of an intermediate person, that you go a little bit slower with it, because the rate of you putting on muscle very, very quickly compared to a beginner is going to be a lot slower. So you better going slower, having a small surplus and taking your time with it. But even if you eat only air quote healthy foods, the unrefined foods, the wholesome micronutrient foods, you still will be gaining a little bit of body fat. But using, like I said, the second analogy of taking it slower, you'll minimize putting on excessive body fat and predominantly putting on muscle. Now, for someone who is really trying to maximize putting on as much muscle as possible, you may be able, if you're already at a lean body fat percentage, you may be able to gain more weight from week to week and have a slightly more aggressive calorie surplus and put maybe a little bit more muscle mass on from month to month. But even then, really is individual, and it depends. Like, if you're kind of around, say, between 15 and 20% body fat in that range, you probably will benefit going a little bit slower in terms of putting on weight. Now, if you're between, say, it's very rare, someone will probably be this, but say between 7 and 12, you could probably be a little bit more aggressive with it. I think when I actually had my body fat done recently when I was in university, it came to around 11%. But I don't really trust the accuracy of that. But even then, I prefer going slow, because it means I don't put as much body fat on. I'm okay with going a longer time frame as opposed to rushing it and putting more body fat on. In the long run, I think it is worth it. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on your time frame, your goals. Say if you've got a holiday booked or something in the summer of next year, you might want to, take a longer bulk and then take a longer cut, whatever you want to do. Or say if you're on a shorter time scale, you might want to have a shorter bulk and then, maybe a bit more aggressive with it, and then have a bit more of an aggressive fat loss phase. It all depends on the individual. But the thing is, I think a lot of people, it just really depends on what you want to do. Both achievable. You can still, the thing is as well, like, you have to do it in phases, which is the hard thing for most people. I think this is where the whole concept of clean bulking really comes from. It's kind of wanting to gain muscle mass but lose fat at the same time, or at least maintain your body fat percentage while putting on muscle mass. And it's a little bit difficult, because most people do this incidentally. It's always kind of accidentally. It's never intentionally. And oftentimes, it's usually with newbies, people who have been just started out, and they usually find that the bodies are getting used to the stimulus of weight training, cardio, and eating right, and they end up losing a little bit of body fat and gaining a little bit of muscle. Now, that isn't to say that when someone is in a fat loss phase that they can't still put on a little bit of muscle, or that when they start a bulking phase that they may even experience at the start of their bulking phase maybe a slight drop in their body fat, and that's to do with the changes in hormones that usually you spike your leptin when you're in a higher calorie intake than when you're in a lower calorie intake. So you actually burn fat a little bit easier when you have higher amounts of carbohydrates specifically. So it really, really just depends. But this clean bulking concept, it's really a bit of a fallacy. You have to prioritize one goal over the other. I recommend doing just a slower bulk and realizing that you can eat foods in moderation, that you can eat certain things in moderation. It's usually between a 10% and 20% calorie allowance that you can eat foods of your liking, which are a little bit more refined, as long as the majority of the diet is from micronutrient foods. You're eating enough fiber and water and things of this nature. But the reality of that, you can do a clean bulk and eat only healthy foods and still gain weight while not, gaining muscle while not gaining any body fat, is a little bit of a lie. You have to gain just a little bit, but it can be greatly minimized if you take your time and you do it proportionately with your energy needs and stuff like that. So hope you've enjoyed that podcast, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.